So I thought we could talk tonight about how to extend compassion to ourselves. So in spirituality, a lot of times there's talk about being compassionate, but often that's talked about in the sense of being compassionate to others, right? Which is fine. It's admirable. It's a good thing to do, right? But tonight I wanted to talk about extending that sense of being compassionate, but extend it to ourselves. Because often the last person that we're willing to be compassionate about is ourselves. We can often be more open and loving to other people, especially when it's seen as a spiritual virtue, than we can to ourselves. We tend to be often much more judgmental, much harsher in evaluation when we consider ourselves. Often we're the last person we forgive. So why is this? This is sort of an odd thing in a sense, but I think there's, a number of reasons for it. One is cultural. Like we have this sense that pride's a sin, for example, and the antidote for pride is to be, judgmental on yourself, to tone down any possibility of self-pride. Then you just go to the opposite and just be self-condemning, as if that will sort of resolve any sense of self-importance. I think also that when we, especially in this country, there's been this sense of, it's sort of appropriate to be, especially hard on oneself, as if that's, the honest thing to do. The adult thing to do is to be sort of, hard on ourselves, to set the bar high, and and then try to live up to whatever standard we've created for ourselves. But this also is just a way of sort of working with our own conditioning and being disapproving of it in some way. Perhaps for a lot of people growing up, we had parents or caregivers or teachers or maybe even so-called friends growing up that were critical of us in some way. And somehow that willingness, or that sort of sense of helplessness almost, to receive that kind of judgmental opinion about ourselves, when we're adults, the parents may no longer be around or no longer interacting in that way with us, but we no longer need them to do that because we can do it to ourselves. It's like, no, I'm all grown up now. I can be judgmental about myself. I don't need mom and dad anymore to do it. There can be some of that. There was once a woman on a retreat who owned up to being judgmental about other people, but then she went on to say that that was okay. That was justified in a sense because she was even harder on herself. Right? So it's like, if I'm hard on myself, that gives me the right somehow to be judgmental about other people. So there can be a lot of different variations about how this sort of self-critical movement works. It can be quite specific in terms of sort of never having forgiven ourselves for something that may have happened years ago. It's no longer happening now, but we just haven't been able to let it go. And can even be a sense of, it wouldn't be right to let me off the hook. If I forgave myself for whatever I did 10 years ago, that would just be, just loose on my part. It wouldn't be right. I need to continue to punish myself for something that I believe was unforgivable. But there's nothing actually that rises to the level of being beyond the grounds of forgivable. Right? Only in our own minds can we hold ourselves to such an unreasonable standard. And it can also be just a vague sense of like I'm not, just there's something about me that's just not quite right, or not quite worthy, or I'm not sure I really belong here in this lifetime. There's some vague sense, and that can often be even more difficult to work with than a specific experience, because we can't quite pin it down. It's just this vague sense. How do you negotiate with that? How do you resolve that? If there's some sort of deep-seated sense of, I don't know, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy. Right? There can be that. So all of these things that I'm describing are just, different ways that we can be reluctant to extend sort of a gentle helping hand to ourselves, a kind hand of compassion. Right? It feels like, no, it wouldn't be right. I don't deserve it somehow. It's almost like a taboo, or something that we shouldn't do lightly. If I let myself off the hook, that just wouldn't be right. So this sense can be obviously, comes out of our conditioning, but it can be such a part of our conditioning that it can remain embedded for a lifetime until we're actually willing to take a close look at it, to see if it's actually a reasonable thing to withhold compassion from ourselves. Right? It almost has that spiritual austerity to it, doesn't it? I mean, just like, no, I'm not gonna extend this olive branch to myself. Right? Almost a sense of austerity. It's got to be good for me, right? So I'd like to suggest three things that will hopefully sort of counterbalance that perhaps cultural view of self-compassion. The first thing is that in almost all cases, what we are doing is seeking happiness. Seeking happiness isn't wrong. It's a natural function. Of course we want to be happy, right? We may often go about it in ways that aren't particularly functional and may get us into trouble. That may be true. But the intent is not wrong. The intent to be happy isn't wrong. It's a natural movement for this or any organism to feel happy. It's a natural thing. So that movement, in seeking that happiness, all of us at different times have done that in ways that proved to be not functional. Didn't bring us or other people happiness, and maybe caused a lot of pain along the way. That may be true. But at the time, the intent was not wrong. The process, how we went about it, may not have been functional. But what is at our last retreat here, somebody asked me, what's our responsibility? And I think that the answer there is our responsibility is to function to the, as best we can, to the limit of our understanding, right? We can't be held to a standard to function above our level of understanding, right? I mean, if we understood more than we understood, we'd function at that level. But at any one time, what we understand about ourselves or others or how the world works or, what the current situation required was just what we knew or could understand at the time. And that's our responsibility to function with integrity to that limit, which I believe most of us do most of the time. And we may find out that what we actually do didn't pay off in the way we expected, and we learn from that. Okay, so the first thing is to recognize that the intent is not wrong, the intent to want to be happy. So the second thing is to recognize that we can't apply the standards of what we know now to what we did then, right? What we did then, we did with what we knew then. And, if looking back at that now, we are embarrassed by whatever we did, or, disheartened or, feel like we really messed up back then, great. Great. It means that in the interim, we learned something. So with our eyes now today, looking back at that, we can see, yeah, with what I know now, I would behave differently then. But also recognize that what I knew then is what I knew then, right? So you can't apply standards of what we know today to how we acted or said or behaved in the past. So we can just see that as, yeah, of course, hopefully we're a little embarrassed about what we did 10 years ago or last week, If not, we haven't learned much in the meantime. Okay, and the third thing is something I've talked about a lot, and just that the extent to which these body minds are conditioned. And to recognize that conditioning was taken on in innocence. It wasn't something that we consciously took on. Even conditioning that we consciously took on, why did we take on that conditioning? Because we were conditioned prior to that to being inclined to take on that conditioning. Right? So we can look back and just see how it all unfolded. We didn't take it on consciously. So much of it was taken on when we were too young to know any better. There were a lot of big people that were in charge, and we were doing the best we could to just feel okay, feel safe. Right. So a lot of that was taken on, and the people that were that we modeled our conditioning after also took on their conditioning in innocence. There's no blame here. There's no basis for finger pointing. Regardless, period. So those are the three things that we can sort of keep in mind to sort of loosen our certainty that it's somehow appropriate to withhold compassion towards ourselves. So there's, as we're looking at this sense that many people have about being unwilling to really be gentle with ourselves, is really being willing to look at this organism through, rather than through the eyes of our judgmental minds, conditioned minds, look at it through the eyes of awareness. And when we look through the eyes of the awareness isn't being judgmental. It's not demanding that we live up to some, self-imposed standard or adopted standard. It's not demanding that at all. It's just present for whatever happens. And that awareness isn't, because it's not being judgmental, it's not running away when something happens. It is what remains aware of whatever happens. Usually it's an arising in the mind, a memory, a self-judgment. Maybe it's a current incident, but often it is a recollected memory. That event isn't happening any longer. We keep it alive by bringing it into current memory, and then we judge ourselves for it, which energizes it, which further stabilizes it. And we do that over and over and over again until we become quite convinced that that is what I am. But none of that is actually true. It may be relatively true for this organism, right? This organism, yes, it was conditioned in that way. Okay. Yes, it does some silly things sometimes. Okay. Spiritually speaking, it's actually very beneficial to have a sense of humor about one's own conditioning. I don't mean in a dismissive, negative kind of way, not that kind of humor, but just see the silliness of it. Sometimes we say silly things. Sometimes we act inappropriately. And sometimes we see, Dad's words coming out of my mouth. Sometimes it happens. So we can learn to be just gentle with that conditioning, because it's not actually what we most essentially are. And this awareness can learn to remain present. It already is present, but we can learn to allow it to be seen as being currently available, currently witnessing whatever is happening, including painful memories as they come up. That energetic is held within these bodies, old trauma, old memories, painful events. And the way those are actually released is when they come up into conscious memory, and we don't run away and we don't judge them. We just allow them to be seen. And that awareness is what can do that. The thinking mind can't. The thinking mind will always have an opinion about it, will always try to improve it, deny it, justify it, argue with it, point out who's to blame. That's what the thinking mind does. The awareness is just aware of it in just the facts. And that awareness can be trusted to do the hard work. It is what, to the extent that conditioning needs to be, let's say, rectified, that awareness is what can do that. If we just allow whatever that memory or experience, allow it just to be seen within the non-judgmental spaciousness of awareness, that has a clarifying effect. Not overnight, but it does. And the more we can trust that, the more quickly that process proceeds. And that awareness is actually what has the capacity to be compassionate towards oneself. It's just its nature to be compassionate. It's not judgmental. It's not excusing or justifying. It's just present without judgment. And that presence without judgment is felt like love. You might even call it God's love. But it's just that innermost nature that is already present in all of us, coming to the fore and recognizing that it is what's actually living this life. And the conditioned form, yes, it's still here. Yes, it will go on for a while. Yes, perhaps it can be more refined, but it's not, it doesn't define what we are. What we are is already that which is already complete, already at peace, already quiet. And just allow yourself to rest there and view this thoroughly conditioned form through those compassionate eyes of awareness.